This is a megalithic site. Those blocks down there are enormous. I'm just going to take you through it, and I'm also going to look at what other people have to say about the site. So before you enter the site, you have to walk past it and you can look down on it from above. And this is the perspective that most people see it from, because not very many people get to go inside and get a really close-up look at the place. So as you actually get through the tunnel and round and into the Osireion, this is how you enter it, through this entranceway. And just looking at the size of these blocks is in itself amazing. And there's often these little tiny blocks around as well. And I will explain those when we come to my full explanation of what I think this is all about. But for now, we're just going to get the feel for it. Let's now have a look at a 3D reconstruction of the site by a YouTube creator called Konstantin Evchenko. These 3D renditions not only give you a really wonderful feel for the way it would have looked, but also they give you the scale really well. You can really feel the size and the majesty of this amazing building. But let's get back to the footage of the tour that I was on.
There once was a time when some humans were fine, but their love for this land is now covered in sand. And guess what? We haven't a clue.
And of course, it would be negligent of me not to point out the flower of life, because this is actually a really big hint at what this site is really all about. But let's get back to the subject of the perspective of the archaeologists. To get a good idea of what the archaeologists are up to at Abydos, at the Osireion in particular, I thought I'd have a good look at the Abydos project. As you can see, this site has a lot of interesting bits and pieces on it, but the thing that interested me next was the reference to James Westerman, because it had a link to his site and the information that he has about the Osireion. So that was my next port of call. The website is very interesting, but it wasn't giving me the answers to the questions that I'd come here for, which is, what do the archaeologists actually think about this site? So I then went to the James Westerman website, and here I did find some answers, and I'd like to share them with you because these are really good. So Westerman, one of the lead archaeologists, lists out the burning questions that most people have about this site. The most interesting comments that he makes is that the Osireion is the equivalent of an 8-story building situated entirely below ground, with water flooding its interior in ways that were envisioned and controlled by the architects. And now we're going to look at some of the independent researchers and what they think about this site. And I'm going to start with one of the bigger ones, which is Ancient Architects, because it also gives a really good introduction.
Interpreted as a subterranean part of the temple complex of 19th dynasty king Seti I, Egyptologists say it was built around 1290 BC, and that it is likely it was never completed.
In the clips from Brian Forster, which we'll be looking at shortly, there is an explanation of why the archaeologists think that it was Seti, but why it's probably not. But hey, that's just my little bias creeping in, but it'll be explained a bit more further on.
The Osireion was located deep underground, and the centrepiece of the structure is the so-called Central Hall, a true marvel of engineering. It is rectangular in shape, with the walls and central island made of limestone and sandstone. The 10 large pillars, their cross beams and the roofing stones were all made of granite. A moat surrounds the central island and there is no access to the 17 perimeter recesses or cells, and to get onto the central island you need to get across the moat.
Ancient architects always give an excellent explanation of every site they come to, so that's why I felt that they're the best ones to start with. But what he mentioned just now was the moat, and so I've just added a photo of this moat, and you'll see it's this icky green colour, and yet it is listed as being potable, which means you can drink it. So, I didn't fancy that. And he then goes on to say,
the island, which contains the 10 enormous granite pillars, also has 2 staircases that descend into the moat on the east and western sides.
The really old photos are the best way to see these staircases because it's the old photos where they've actually been able to take the picture while they had got the water out. And that was quite a massive job, and they didn't get it all the way out, as you can see from that photo, but they got it out enough so that they could get a better feel for what the staircase looks like.
There are also 2 recesses sunk into the centre of it, one rectangular and one square. A seismic survey showed that the actual foundations are 15 metres deep. That's 49.2 feet.
If you look at this diagram, you'll see where the steps end, and that's how far they got to taking the water out. But obviously it goes much, much deeper than that.
Interestingly, the seismic equipment also recorded voids or cavities inside the central island.
Basically what that means is this box in the middle here, they believe has some, let's say, rooms in it, which they would very much like to get into.
There appears to be an angled hole which follows a true north direction. It penetrates 2 blocks, is clearly man-made and is over 1 metre long.
This is what's really exciting for me because this is the strongest indicator for me is actually what it probably was. This next bit that he's going to describe is something that when I was there, I immediately spotted that the place had been completely sealed up. And when I asked the Egyptologist about it, he said, yes, I was completely right. They had to break in to get to this part of the Osireion. But how did they know it was there?
By breaking through the middle cell on the eastern wall of the central hall, you enter what is known as the sarcophagus room. This crude entrance is the only way in or out, apart from one treasure hunter's tunnel in the northern end of the eastern wall. What is most interesting about this chamber is that scholars believe that the room itself is one enormous sarcophagus. There is no original entrance, and it is therefore safe to assume that it was never meant to have one.
There's lots more interesting stuff on the video from Ancient Architects, but I'm just sticking with a few clips that are pertinent to the information that we're collecting at the moment. And so we'll move on to the next independent researcher. But I think it's safe to say that Ancient Architects is consistent with what the archaeologists are saying about the site, and they believe that the Osireion is for symbolic religious purposes. So I hope I got that summary right, but let's move on now to Brian Forster. The actual on-site video footage from his channel is, in my opinion, the best. It really takes you for a good close look. So I do suggest, once again, you go to their channel and you have a good look at it, because it's really good. Mind you, I know I said that about Ancient Architects as well, but hey, I've picked on the best of the independent researchers, so you would expect that I would be saying that sort of thing about them. But here's where it gets interesting, because here's where they explain why the archaeologists think that this site was Seti I.
Here in the Osireion, as we're coming down standing here, they are attributing this to Seti I as well, but he built this. But why they're attributing it to Seti I was there was a dovetail joint up in the corner of the granite, and underneath the side of the dovetail joint had Seti I's cartouche in it. This is Seti I's temple, just right back here. I think that when he came in here to build his temple, he found these and were afraid they were going to start falling in and put the dovetail joint up there.
Best footage. I mean, look at the detail you get to see in this footage. You get to see all the places where those little tiny stones exist. You get to see the detail of the inset for each of the doorways into the small rooms. It is definitely the best footage. One of the reasons I didn't get very good footage of it was that I was so in the moment with it that I just only took a few clips of video and a few photos because I was so amazingly stunned by what I saw and felt when I went to this location.
To be honest, I've got nothing to say because the site is speaking for itself. What's interesting in here is this lintel, which is a cream color. Again, I think this is a type of quartzite, not just a local sandstone, and it's in each room as far as I remember. Again, that really interesting golden colored, I think, quartzite, not sandstone. And some curious protrusions like what we see in Peru and also at the Menkaure pyramid in Egypt. So the building is perfectly bilaterally symmetrical. And the strange depressions like we see at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. Hieroglyphs from the dynastic time period. But obviously this is pre-dynastic masterpiece that was built on purpose underground.
Joanna James has some great observations to add to the collection that we've already made from the other independent researchers and, of course, the archaeologists. So here are some of her clips, and I love the way it's sprinkled with humour.
What's interesting about the Temple of Seti is that it's on the wonk. It's got a sort of right angle. It makes like an L shape, which is very unusual in its design. And what is also unusual is at the end of where the temple should, in theory, continue on, you are hit with a second temple that is not connected to the Temple of Seti. So the Osireion and the Temple of Seti are two completely separate sites.
She goes on to explain this debate.
So one argument is that the reason why the temple above ground is in an L shape is because when they were building the temple, they hit this even older ancient temple, and that could be one of the reasons why they decided to build it in an L shape.
Hey, look who we've spotted there. It's NEXT. Oh, but I have deviated. No, please continue.
Or they did it on purpose. They wanted this temple to be absolutely as close as possible to an even ancient structure. And so they deliberately built it carefully around what was already there.
Johanna, in her video, gives an absolutely fantastic explanation of what the process was that the archaeologists have been through. Who dug what, where, when, what they found. So go to her channel, find out what she said about that, because it really, really is good. So I won't include those clips. You'll have to go find those for yourself. But I am going to add the clip that she's done explaining this.
And you can see that there is like a sort of middle island, which is sandstone, and then huge single cut, one big old piece granite block pillars. So we've got granite blocks. What's missing today is the roof, which also would have been made by these huge megalithic granite blocks. Sandstone base and sandstone sort of side walls. And then the actual enclosure is limestone.
These are the more boring aspects of looking at the Osireion. And yet Johanna manages to make it seem all very, very interesting.
I did not realize just how deep the Osireion goes. This is going to blow your mind. So in this diagram, see here, you've got a little person and you've got the huge granite blocks, and that is the current floor level that you can walk around today when you visit. But the inner island, which has steps going down into the water, the inner island measures with seismic technology, they have calculated it to be 15 meters. 15 meters. That is a 5-story building.
You're probably thinking to yourself, we've already heard all that.
Now, the seismic tests showed something else really exciting. It is not one solid block going down, that there is a hollow chamber in there. Who knows what the heck's inside there?
I'm going to answer this question because I've already kind of told you in the first episode, but it's water. What's in there is water and the mechanisms for maintaining that water to the desired level. And I'll explain why in my final episode. So I don't want to give away too much at this stage. Let's get back to Johanna.
So it's 15 meters deep, 12.5 meters wide, and 21.8 meters long. This is freaking huge.
No one can describe how large this megalithic site is better than Johanna.
This is freaking huge. So the water level that it is at today is the lowest level that they were able to get with modern machinery. Not only that, there is not a solid foundation to the Osireion. The Osireion is built on water saturated sand. Just how far you have to go down before you would hit bedrock, and it's 900 meters.
I'm not sure I have to point this out, but it's one gigantic slab popped into sand. So just think about that. One gigantic slab, and it's surrounded by blocks of gigantic stone. But it's that one big gigantic stone that you need to think about. And there's quite a few more excellent points that she makes that aren't made in some of the other videos. So I'll just pop them all together for completeness.
There is a heat source somewhere under the Osireion that is heating the water. You would need this amount of space to excavate out and dig out the rock and the sand and everything needed. Looking at the angle to build this site, it's almost impossible for the site to have been built after or alongside the Seti temple. Was it in fact a legacy structure that has been left from a previous civilization? Is it an early 1st, 2nd, 3rd dynasty Egyptian structure? The 19th dynasty built a structure basically almost on top of it. Did they discover it then, or did they always know it was there and that's why they put their site on top of the old site? There are arguments that sway, even though architecturally it's a completely different style.
Johanna doesn't explicitly give an opinion on this, but it certainly looks like she's leaning towards it being a lot older than a Seti temple. Of the independent researchers that we're going to have a look at are Megalithomania, and this channel is one of my favorites. You probably think I keep saying that, but this channel is great because they actually go looking for all the clues and they give you their opinion. So let's have a look.
This is probably the most interesting site in the whole of Egypt, which is, I believe, contemporary with the Valley Temple and the pyramids of the Giza Plateau. But it could be like super ancient. It could be like one of the first constructions here, like going back 10, 12,000 years.
So this opinion is the same opinion as mine, but I'm not going to go any further. I'm just going to let them continue.
Some interesting features, including the flower of lives, the mortise and tenon joints, and the evidence of ancient technology.
Another prize-winning statement from my perspective, the ancient technology.
And we're looking along one side of the Osireion here. And you can just see that the ground level is at the very top. So this was built deep into the ground, or it's so old that the ground level was in fact down here many, many thousands of years ago.
Isn't that an interesting quandary to ponder? Where was the ground level?
You can kind of see evidence of the puffy polygonal stonework. You've got like drill holes, core drills, You got the seams, which you can't even fit a credit card or a banknote between. You got the polygonal areas. You've got these nubs and everything else. Absolutely incredible. It's amazing to get this close up. It just looks like you're in ancient Peru. Then we've got the cornering here in the shade. Look at that. That is just like the cornering, the exact style you find in Peru. It's like this is the same builders.
All these are points that I plan on addressing in. So this is like a summary of all the key things that we're going to be looking at later.
This place was clearly a site of reverence and possibly somewhere where people would come for healing purposes at a much later date. We have much later evidence of activity here in these flower of life symbols, which you can see on the inside of these uprights over there.
So well worded, but yes, this is something that is absolutely critical to understanding this site. Not only the healing powers, but also the symbolism of the tree of life. And once again, we're going to be addressing that in a lot more detail in the final episode.
And you can also see within some of the uprights here where there's cuts, vertical cuts, where quite clearly either parts of them have either been tried to be broken off at a later point, or whether this is actually quarry marks that were done at the time of construction itself.
In my opinion, that is the handiwork of the dynastic Egyptians.
And here we've got a good section of the roof as well, and you can see, interestingly, the way it kind of joins up with the top sections, the top lintels. Like on top of the lintels was this roof, and you got polygonal sections there as well. So this is just so much going on in this particular site. Not only do we find the nubs, we find the protrusions, the indentations, mortise and tenon joints on top of them, but also the angles and the very small stones that are kind of linking up the corners could represent some mathematical kind of story. They were working with sacred geometry. There's golden section here, there's sacred number, there's intricate measurement systems.
Excellent points made.
So that is the sacred entrance that Seti created to go into the Osireion that he discovered whilst building this site.
So this is an assumption that they have made about Seti not being the builder, but it's the same conclusion that I have reached. I would not word it as being fact, but it's certainly an opinion that I hold which matches theirs.
To the fact that this is much older than the time of Seti I, but he was aware of what was going on and continued some kind of tradition that already existed, perhaps for thousands of years.
So Yusef's just been pointing out that there's this corner block down here, which is part of the actual full top roof. Is absolutely huge. You can't see it, it's all under the rubble, but it would have come up like 20 or 30 feet across, and then it kind of joins up and it's kind of puffy on top, which is very, very odd. And so we're seeing like even the roof had a kind of puffy part on top, but then on top of that would have been kind of shaped and angled stones, almost like a classic roof that we see in some of the temples on either end of the site. So just there you can see the scoop marks on one of the walls.
Now that's an interesting observation that I haven't heard anybody else actually point out. And this final clip coming up is extremely pertinent to the things I'm going to be telling you. Because of the similarity to Stonehenge, I can actually explain what the linkage is. So here's his comment.
There are remarkable resemblances to Stonehenge with this site. And we know there were Egyptian connections with Britain.
So a fantastic series of clips from a fantastic channel. And let's move on. The next independent researcher we're going to look at here is Ben of Uncharted X. Once again, a fantastic channel. And I'm not just biased because he's a fellow Antipodean. It's great, and he really takes us and shows us an awful lot of things. So Ben has quite a lot of material on his channel, and so finding the right episode to look at, to take clips from, was very difficult. So I just took the one that looked the most likely, but I might be missing out on some very good stuff because he does go into a lot of detail on some very interesting things. So hopefully I've got all the best bits to share with you. So let's just get started and have a look.
And this is the socket. You can actually see how the socket, like how this was a socket for one of the big granite pillars. You can see like the ledge here, like where it was inset, and they would sit this pillar on around this edge. And there's a void beneath it, and there's a bloody tube drill here that I've always wondered about. But for one, now I can actually get my foot in here and I can get down and look at this thing.
Well, this is certainly one of the more intriguing, mysterious aspects of the Osireion, what it's for, in terms of it being a location for one of the granite pillars. I would disagree with that, but nevertheless, I think it's fascinating, and I think that he gives us such a good close look at this.
It actually gets more regular as it goes in too. It's kind of weird, this hole, and it actually shoots off. It shoots off under here, and it turns a corner, and it goes down, and it like goes down into like the deep part. This is ground. Like this is, I don't know what this was for. Like, why are they either pumping air or water or something beneath these pillars? What is the purpose of this? And so it shoots off over here and then turns and goes down and pops out down in the deeper part down here, which is really odd. And there's actually another one in the other side too.
I think it's a fair assumption to make about the pillars, but I just happen to disagree with it. But that's another story which we will get to. But this is fascinating. The next clip is also something that people don't really discuss in their episodes, so that makes it all the more intriguing. He talks about the way that the stones have shifted.
You can see the shift in the stone, like there's been a gap.
The reason for the stones shifting and the gaps and like that little bit where that corner is broken off there, there's good reason for that, and it's all about earthquakes.
You can kind of see how the temple sort of dog legs, right? Because they ran into it, probably. But so this is the Osireion which we were walking around. It's at a lower level. You saw the pictures. But so on the axis of the Osireion, so as it runs this way, all the way through this temple, they went out to the courtyard, out here, out in front, on the axis of the Osireion, and they drilled. And at like 130 or 140 feet, this is very much like what happened at Giza. At 130 or 140 feet, on the axis of the Osireion, they hit granite. And there's no granite here. Like, this is limestone as well. So they drilled. So there seems to be a tunnel running beneath this. Like, I don't know how big it is, but no one's really explored it much further. But they hit granite. They've hit infrastructure like out in the courtyard here on the axis of the Osireion, going this way. So we don't know.
Well, in just those few clips, those are some amazing points that Ben has made. Having just watched that episode from Uncharted X, it reminded me of another channel, and it's the channel called CF Apps 7865. So this is the channel of the late great Chuck. Now, I never met Chuck, but I have some dear friends who knew him and spoke very highly of him and the work that he did. So I thought that it would be negligent of me not to at least include a few clips from his channel. So let's check out a few clips from CF Apps 7865. And these are clips, or should I say points, that other people haven't raised.
Seems this was a very sacred spot. Let me just back out for 1 second. Here you see a place mark, 7,300-year-old city, going back to 5,300 BC. Why do I have that marker there? But here's a story from 2016. Ancient residential city, cemetery discovered at Abydos. The head of the antiquities sector announced the discovery of a cemetery and residential city dating back to 5,316 BC. So that's over 2,000 years before the official recognized start of dynastic Egypt.
I'm sure you can all see where he's going with this point, which is that this area was clearly very well used even in the pre-dynastic era and possibly long before that. And the next clip is also clearly as pertinent.
But you can see the top of the stone sticking out here, and then you see up above the Temple of Seti in the classic dynastic Egyptian style building here. And then right down here you see these megalithic blocks that look so familiar from very ancient sites, including Peru.
But this is something that I do find very, very interesting, and I will have a much closer look next time I visit the Osireion.
I think it's time that we have to assume that this was built by the builder gods. They seem to have prolific knowledge of stonework.
I'm assuming that the term the builder gods is just a really nice way of saying the people who came before with the more advanced technology.
But just to the west and a little bit to the north of the Osireion, here is the royal necropolis, the royal cemetery. The very earliest rulers that we know about from the standard model of history come from here.
And there is Nama, as in the famous Nama's palette.
Here's one of the tombs of one of the very early dynastic rulers. They were not building very special. The Osireion comes from a total different period of building, and it came much earlier.
And of course he makes another very good point here.
But that's why the very earliest dynasty rulers are buried here. This was considered a very sacred place.
So that all makes perfect sense. But what was this place?
I don't think this is the tomb of Osiris. I think this is the temple that celebrates his resurrection.
Well, quite possibly it was used for ceremonial purposes like that. But in my opinion, there is much more to it than just a temple to celebrate Osiris. Now let's have a look at the land of Kem. This is a channel that I'm actually quite excited about. He's come up with quite an interesting theory for the Osireion, and I think he's partially correct in that I think that what he describes is the way that the dynastic Egyptians used this site once they discovered it. But I don't think that it was the original purpose for this site. So let's get on to what the land of Kem has got to say on this subject.
The function of this structure in later episodes, that the Osireion was absolutely intended for people to go inside. Very different than the pyramids themselves.
I totally agree with both aspects of this point. Yes, it was. This one was definitely designed for people to go inside.
Next up, some fantastic renderings produced by Keith Hamilton that show the configuration and the geology of the construction, so you can really see what the Osireion may have looked like in its original condition. And in this one particularly, you can see the water-filled moat surrounding the central island here, with the stairs leading down into the water. And here, showing the stairs, again, leading into the water, and the depth of the two vertical shafts leading down to the subterranean aquifer and water table below the structure. And the last one from Keith Hamilton, showing a beautiful and complete representation of the original structure, with the roofing beams that once covered this having been removed.
You're probably saying by this point, we've already covered this ground in other clips that we've seen. Well, yes, you are right, but I am doing it this way because the description that he gives is very important to the theory that he then puts forward. So it's so important to have the whole picture in one go. So that is why I included that clip also. I know it's nothing new. I should point out that some of these clips are not in the original order, but they are in the order necessary just to briefly give you the full perspective of his theory. So let's get him to explain it now and walk us through how he believes the Osireion was utilized.
I will be your conductor as I escort you along the same path as so many initiates that have come before you, as we descend into the subterranean underworld which has been symbolically recreated within the Osireion to represent the abode of Osiris and the realm of creation. So as the candidate began the ritual, he was escorted through the long entrance tunnel here in complete darkness.
I'm not sure about the complete darkness thing in the tunnels, but I'm going to go along with it. But when it comes to the Osireion itself, it would not have been in complete darkness. And I have a good reason for that. But there would at least be an opening to the sky in the middle. So we'll come back to that in the final episode. But in the meantime, let's continue with the story of the initiate.
As the red granite pillars and beams within this structure interacted with the electric fields coursing through these dielectric materials to produce profound ultrasonic vibrations within the chamber, eliciting not only a mental, but physical and biological transformation within the candidate.
I completely agree with everything so far in this perspective.
So as he stood here on the threshold of the inner sanctum, it was revealed to the candidate that no one could cross onto the central primordial mound without undergoing a ritual of purification by water, known in the ancient times as lustration, and only those who had been submerged and cleansed in the primordial waters could proceed through the rest of the initiation ritual.
All good so far. I don't have any objections. I can't say whether he's correct or not, but all makes good sense to me.
There is absolutely no way to cross onto the central island without first being submerged into the very special water source upon which this temple was constructed.
Okay then, please continue.
So the initiate would then plunge into the water off of this ledge here, fully immersing himself in the transformative waters that filled the inner reservoir. And after this ritual purification, he could then ascend the stairway onto the central island, where the remaining ritual of death and resurrection of Osiris was then conferred. And this central island is surrounded by 17 individual cells, which I propose were also intended for illumination of the temple and acoustic amplification.
It may certainly have served that purpose, those little niches, when the dynastic Egyptians were using it for initiation purposes, but I believe there was a lot more to those little tiny rooms, and I will explain in the last episode.
So this entire central structure would have been completely darkened.
So far, this is the only bit that I actually disagree with him on. It would not have been in total darkness,
but surrounded by glowing lights and reverberating sound, recreating the primordial sound of creation, the voice of God, moving through the celestial realm. This would have been a truly mind-altering and life-changing experience.
He then goes on to explain some of the pertinent numbers and a description of what it was like in the dark. So we won't actually go into that, but I do recommend you go to his channel because everything is really good that he does. I know you hear me say this a lot, but it's true. He's thought things through so well. I really can't fault his thought processes. So let's move on to what happens to the initiate next.
The candidate would then receive the rite of symbolic death and resurrection on the 17th day, most likely in a sarcophagus that was housed here in the central recess.
Of course, it is possible that the dynastic Egyptians put in a symbolic sarcophagus into this particular slot for whatever purpose that they had, but these two slots, from my perspective, had very different purposes before the dynastic Egyptians started to use it for initiation purposes.
And just imagine what this would have been like to participate in this ancient ritual of purification by water, death, and rebirth within one of the most magnificent ancient structures that was ever constructed in Egypt. The chamber itself, permeated with electric fields and echoing, reverberating ultrasound, initiating a biochemical transformation within the candidate that affected not only his consciousness, but also his physical body. And yes, not all of these structures were created for manufacturing industrial scale chemicals like ammonia or sulfuric acid, but they were all intended to produce alchemical transformations. In this case, the biochemical ascension of the candidate being initiated into the mystery school or cult of Osiris.
Well, I have no issue with what he said. I don't believe that it was complete darkness, but the rest, I think he's got a good case there, and I think that the dynastic Egyptians may well have used it for these purposes because of the amazing properties that this location would have had.
So this subterranean temple at the Osireion was capped with a dome-like structure. And I would propose that this originally featured an obelisk structure at the top.
Here's where we differ in perspective. Because I believe that there was an opening to the sky, I also believe that the obelisk, which I do agree there was an obelisk, would have come from within the structure and gone up and out. Very tall obelisk through the opening and at the top and out into the open area, and it could probably be seen for a long way away sticking up. He goes on to describe the properties of water pertinent to this site, but we won't get into that right now.
That was designed to represent the abode of Osiris, the primordial mound and waters from which all creation arose, in which the initiatory ritual of purification, death, and resurrection was conferred on candidates, being initiated into the ancient mystery school or cult of Osiris.
Do go to his channel and check out this stuff. It is fascinating. So we're on the final stretch looking at the independent researchers. That would be very, very negligent of me not to have included Jimmy of Bright Insight. So here we go, and he makes some really interesting points.
Abydos Egypt, approximately 340 miles south of the Great Pyramid of Giza, is just another example of a prehistoric civilization. Because make no mistake, the people living in Egypt a few thousand years ago, also known as the ancient Egyptians, could not have constructed this site.
One of the things I really like about Jimmy's channel is that he gets to the point. He doesn't beat about the bush. He just gets straight in and says what he thinks.
And as you can see here, here's a layout or a map of the site, which of course is referred to as a temple. Isn't it funny how everything from ancient times is always a temple?
That is a great point. I've thought that myself, but I've never actually said it.
There's different artist renditions of what it may have looked like before it deteriorated or fell apart or was destroyed. You can see that there's some sort of oval, arch-type, circular structure to the roofing system. You can see some evidence here in this black and white photo.
Now, that's interesting. Nobody else has pointed that out before, even though we've seen similar diagrams.
But one of the truly amazing things about it is the size and the weight of these granite blocks. And you can compare here, as you see these other pillars next to comparison of the door. And this is a normal-sized door. So when you look at these photos, you don't realize that many of these pillars are 8 feet by 8 feet by 12 feet in height. But what makes it even more interesting is how they lifted them into place. As you can see here, they had interlocking wedges as they stacked them on top of each other. And upon a closer look, this roofing system was double layered, which is incredible considering just how massive these blocks are.
Another very good point that we haven't seen from the other independent researchers.
Look at these various cut marks and how they closely resemble, as you now see here, from Cusco, Peru. But it goes even further than that. Look at these various knob marks that you find from Cusco to Egypt, as well as up in Machu Picchu, which is very, very similar, as you can see from these knob marks located right here at the Osireion.
This comparison has also been given by other independent researchers, but that was very succinct, so I thought I would include it. And Jimmy gives his opinion in a nutshell.
To suggest that this is a temple for praying and to create a roofing system like this and these pillars that are as big as they are, I think there's more to this story.
We're going to look at the site again from a 3D modelling perspective. Let's start with a channel called ARCE National.
There once was a time when some humans were fine, but their love for this land is now covered in sand. And guess what? We haven't a clue. It's not what they say when the gods ruled the day. It was people.
Well, that's a very, very hard act to follow, but we're going to continue on the theme of looking at the site from a 3D modelling perspective. And although I've already mentioned this creator, we're just going to revisit it because it's really great to get into the mindset of how it actually looked originally. Now, there's a few things in this model that I don't agree with. They've got the sarcophagus in the middle there, and they also have the middle of the roof completely open to the outside world, whereas I think it was only partially open, but that's really very minor. So this is a great model, and it really helps you to visualize what it looked like. It almost feels like you could just walk in and have a look around just like that. And here we have the channel of Richard Smith, where there has been some more really amazing 3D modelling. This model gives you a really good feel for those little niches around the outsides of the Osireion. You turn around and you see all the niches all around. Here, when it drops down, it's only dropping down to a water level that had been achieved when they were able to pump out the water. So that lower level that we're looking at is not the ground, it is a water level. Now we've just got a very brief clip from Lucid Trips, another small channel that's very well worth checking out.
The ceiling panels in all these alcoves, if you look at them, when they get to the wall, they do this.
Oh yeah, they bend.
So the ceiling is 3 inches higher than the wall part of the ceiling panel. So it goes thicker and then...
That is a really good observation, especially from a small channel. Hey, look who's talking. I'm only a small channel too. But hey, it really was a good observation. This photo shows it the best. It's almost like an upside down shower. You know, the bottom of the shower, how it has that ridge around it to make sure that the water doesn't go out. It's a bit like that. And it's like that in every single one of those little niches. We're now going to revisit Uncharted X because it's a complete walkthrough of the Osireion and it is fabulous. Please go watch it. I'll only show you a few clips and they probably won't be in the same order as they were in the original video. This is just the order of relevance for what we're looking at, what we're building up to, should I say, in looking at the Osireion.
It's an island. Like you're literally looking at, even zoom out a bit further, this whole thing's an island built on top of an aquifer that's 5 or 6 stories tall, made from granite.
Although what he just said is nothing new, he put it so beautifully into a nutshell of what the Osireion actually is. It's an island. And the next clip is an observation Ben made, and it's very relevant to my theory of what this site is all about. So this particular indentation where people think was another pillar is something that I will be discussing in my final episode because something very important was sitting in that particular slot.
But it's inset slightly, like it's like this inset that runs around the edge of this. I'll even zoom out a bit more. Runs around the edge of this whole pillar base, and you'll find the same thing on these other pillars. So if we look at the base of this pillar, You see it's inset, right? It's inset in, so I think this was likely a pillar base.
The next is a discussion of the alcoves, or as I sometimes call them, niches.
Also, you can see all of the alcoves, those cells, alcoves, whatever you want to call them, about 6 feet wide or 7 feet wide and tall. Insets, they have tube drills in the holes there that are in the tops, so they had doors.
Take a look here at all of the second level blocks in between the alcoves. All of them along the line here, they're all a single piece. Sometimes the bottom level, you'll have a couple of blocks in there, but all of the second level blocks are a single piece. They have complex geometries. They curve in and around the doorway and then into the alcove and onto the back walls.
So they found keystones, and some of those keystones have had like the cartouche of Seti I on them, like these locking keystones that sit on top of some of the blocks. And I've heard people say, well, that's proof that he built it, but I don't think it's any more proof that he built it any more than the hieroglyphs are proof that he built it.
Of course, I agree with that completely. I don't think Seti built it. I think he found it, restored it, probably, and added his own bits and pieces to it. And in fact, Yusuf seems to think the same, and he goes on to add to it that he thinks there are multiple layers.
3 different structures, 4 if we added the modern one with the terraces and this. And then we have the blocks of sandstone here. And then we have the blocks of limestone here, which is also built by the new kingdom. So this was probably the doing of Seti I, and this was the doing of Merim Petah. Seems like what we found here, perhaps, I'm not positive 100%.
And they could well have accessed these keystone blocks and either inscribed them or even put these keystone blocks into place, because as we've seen from other examples, they're not exactly super tight fitting. And we know that whoever built the Osireion could make little inset blocks that are incredibly well fitting. We see many, many examples of this in the quartzite walls that make up the Osireion itself. And in fact, there are a couple of places where there are little inset blocks that just fit perfectly. What we see in the keystone blocks really doesn't match that.
In the final clip, Yusuf theorizes how some of the dates have been reached by the archaeologists.
Inscriptions can be added by those who inherited the site, and we by mistake used these inscriptions.
So we've only looked at a few clips from that video. I strongly recommend you find it and watch it because it is so good, and you will really enjoy it. Okay, I will move on now. We are now going to briefly revisit Chuck from CF Apps 7865 because I hadn't seen this video earlier and there's a few really good points in it.
Egyptologists will tell you that this Osireion was built by Seti I as a basement temple, and he built it in this style just to reflect an older time. And he built it in water. That's what Egyptologists will tell you. But that just doesn't seem to fly with me. Common sense tells you that these two temples were created at different times. So did Seti I want to build his temple and attach it to the older legacy of the Osireion? What I am thinking is he discovered this ancient temple and aligned his new temple just to attach his legacy to an older time.
And this is exactly how I view it too. So let's keep going.
And of course, in the temple of Seti I, we have some pretty unique things, and it's possible that he unearthed some ancient information in the Osireion, because in the temple of Seti I, we have an ancient kings list that hints of older times than the first dynasty, and we have some interesting glyphs on the walls in that temple of Seti.
Now, this is essentially that Seti found information when he also found the Osireion, and that information enabled him to get the very much longer King's List put on one of the walls. The Osireion is the equivalent of an 8-story building situated entirely below ground, with water flooding its interior in ways that were envisioned and controlled by the architects. Standard archaeological thought seems to be that the Osireion was built at the same time or slightly before the Seti temple by Seti I. It seems that some archaeologists might be a little bit more open-minded on that subject, however, as is indicated by the following quote by James Westerman. Without the advantage of contemporary benchmarks, dating the Osireion is complicated. Architecturally, it is Old Kingdom design. The Osireion had to have been built before the adjoining Seti temple, because it is founded so deep that the hole it rests in would have extended well into the site of the Seti temple during construction. Perhaps this is one reason the Seti temple has its unique L shape. As for what the Osireion was for, archaeologists can speculate. Here is another quote from James Westerman. We still don't know why the Osireion was built. Is the Osireion a temple of worship, a testament to a god, the tomb of a god, or maybe the tomb of a king? Did it serve several of these purposes, or some other purpose entirely? Now we're going to find out what independent researcher Brian Forster thinks of this site.
But obviously this is pre-dynastic masterpiece that was built on purpose underground, and then when Seti I found it, he built his building next to it.
Now let's get a few quick clips from Johanna of Funny Old World.
And you can see that there is like a sort of middle island, which is sandstone, and then huge single cut, one big old piece, granite block pillars. So we've got granite blocks. What's missing today is the roof, which also would have been made by these huge megalithic granite blocks. Sandstone base and sandstone sort of side walls, and then the actual enclosure is limestone.
So that was a great summary. Now let's have a look at a few key points that Johanna has made about this site.
This is going to blow your mind. So in this diagram, see here, you've got a little person and you've got the huge granite blocks, and that is the current floor level that you can walk around today when you visit. But the inner island measures with seismic technology, they have calculated it to be 15 meters. There is not a solid foundation to the Osireion. The Osireion is built on water saturated sand.
So it's deep, very deep.
That Seti is cutting in his temple, and he comes across the Osireion, this part of the Osireion, probably ruinous, maybe that's conjecture, and then he decides to skew his old temple around and maybe reconstruct here. There's a lot of open questions here, but it's next to inconceivable given how the Egyptians built their temple.
And now we are finally at the climactic finale, and I'm going to tell you what I think the Osireion was originally for. The Osireion is a megalithic marvel standing unassumingly at the rear of the Seti I temple in Abydos, Egypt. Its origin, according to archaeologists, coincides with the construction of that temple, and that would make it about 3,300 years ago. The architectural style, however, is more in line with the buildings of the Old Kingdom, dating back 4,500 years. Yet I propose that it actually predates even the Old Kingdom. The level of engineering prowess at this site is simply incomprehensible to the layman and profoundly humbling to any seasoned engineer or stonemason. It presents us with megalithic blocks of breathtaking size in rose granite. What we see of this building is but the tip of a 5-story megalithic stone iceberg, so it goes down about 15 meters. Let's also add to that the fact that it's built on sand and not on a base of bedrock. Bedrock is a further 900 meters down. The trilithons that form the central part are made from cut rose granite, while the outer walls are a blend of limestone and sandstone. The building itself is underground, or at least was underground originally, and the majority of the structure is in fact underwater, which is part of the design. Around the main stone island is essentially a colossal well that plunges down into the depths of the ground. So this island that essentially sits in the center of this gigantic well is totally independent. There is no access way to it from the side walls. There are, however, two supporting thrust beams. They're relatively small, considering the size of this building, but they link the island to the outer wall. My theory regarding the structure is based on a similar building that I saw in a dream. And before you roll your eyes and write me off as woo-woo, just check out my explanation, because it covers all the aspects of this strange megalithic structure. By the way, I think these dreams are past life memories, but you might think it's just my mind subconsciously putting bits of information together and coming up with a conclusion. Either way, check it out, because I think that my explanation covers all the bases. So, if you're interested in the Osireion, please hear me out. Okay, let's talk about the building that I saw in my dreams. So the structure that manifested itself in my dream bore a striking similarity to the Osireion, albeit on a grander scale. It was much, much bigger. And it was slightly different architecturally, being circular, not square. And it too was subterranean, and it had a central island with a body of water all around it. And that was obviously reminiscent of a moat, very much in the same way as the Osireion. And it went deep into the ground, as does the Osireion. And it had megalithic stone trilithons linked in a circular way, much in the same way as Stonehenge, but much, much larger. And this structure really was a lot bigger than the Osireion. There were small rooms all around the outside walls of the building. So that's on the outer part of the moat. And these rooms were all sealed, each with a very large block. And the entrance was different to the Osireion. It was through a shaft, not through a walkway. And there was a room prior to entering it, but to my memory there wasn't one on the other side, whereas there is in the Osireion. Let's have a look at the clues, those little mysteries that make up this structure, because it's these clues that will provide the answers. So what are the clues? Number 1, monumental megaliths of rose granite, arranged into a sequence of trilithons. Number 2, the exterior walls are polygonal in nature, and they're adorned with tiny little blocks, rounded cornerstone blocks, pillow-shaped blocks, indents, and nubs, and they have a striking resemblance to similar stonework in Peru. Number 3, it's an underground structure that has a multi-story stone island surrounded by a moat of water and encased in a stone block room. Clue number 4 is the missing parts of the structure. So the 2 inset areas, which reveal the location of 2 items that are no longer there. There's even an area around one of those that shows that it had some kind of outline, which I will explain later on. Number 5 are the drill holes in one of the inset areas, and also some small drainage trenches around the island. So those are the clues that we're going to address. Now we're going to look at them one by one, and I'm going to give you an explanation for each one of those. So let's look at what's behind each of these clues one by one, starting with the massive megalithic cut blocks in rose granite, which is set into a series of trilithons. So these are one of the most crucial elements to this design, as the size of the blocks and the type of stone creates the piezoelectric energy, both within the water and around the chamber, that makes this a healing center. And the water concentrates this energy and enables it to cycle naturally. The next clue to address are the polygonal outer walls. So this is the wall that surrounds the moat. And in that wall there are tiny blocks, there are large blocks, there are curved corner blocks, there are pillow shapes, there are indents into the blocks, and there are nubs sticking out of the rocks. And there is an incredible similarity to similar stonework in Peru, the other side of the world. This part of the building does not need to be cut stone, but it does need to be strong and capable of withstanding both earthquakes and the test of time. Based on what I've seen in my dreams, this part of the Osireion is not cut blocks. It's artificially created geopolymer blocks. And the tiny blocks are designed to break or crumble in an earthquake, releasing tension that might otherwise destroy the building. Curved corners provide added strength and are not difficult to create if using geopolymer. Pillow shapes, indents and nubs are simply a byproduct of creating the walls using geopolymer. This part of the building doesn't have to look good. It's not important. It's the functionality that matters. So I'm not going to go into the reason for the nubs or the indents or the pillows in this particular episode, as I've already covered it in previous episodes on the stonework of the ancients. And I've also discussed the similarity to Peru. And the answer is simple. It's basically the same people. But let's keep going, because we've got some more clues to address. The next clue is that the building is an underground structure that has a multi-story stone island structure in the center, surrounded by a moat of water, encased in a stone room. And this specific design goes deep down into the earth to maximize the piezoelectric energy, and it provides security for the most valuable thing the ancients had, and enabled the production of a product that extended their lives. And yes, I am talking about what we know today as an ankh, and it is the key of life. I will explain shortly how this all fits together. We now move on to an explanation of the fourth clue, which is the missing parts of the structure, the two areas that are inset that reveal the location of two items that are no longer there. The missing parts, in my opinion, are an obelisk and a large planter containing a very special plant. The obelisk enabled a different type of energy to be received within the structure, and that's radiant energy. So this is the energy that was from the energy grid of our planet, which the Great Pyramid contributed to, and it was used for technology of the ancients, while the planter held the tree of life. This tree or plant was used to create a cure to aging and was distributed through devices that looked like ankhs, or effectively pine cones. The reason the difference between the pine cone and the ankh, if you look at the top of the ankh, it's essentially a pine cone shape. It's just that was how it was held in place in the stand, which was in the hand. When pulled away from the stand, what you had left was the collection device, which was the pine cone shape. There are many depictions of the Mesopotamian gods with these pine cones and with the same plant. So extracting what was necessary from the plant, using the ankh or the pine cone, and then being able to process it using that device and using it for longevity. So there's both the pine cone and the plants in a lot of the depictions from Mesopotamia. And it's that plant and that device which was being used in this location. And very few equivalent depictions appear in the art of ancient Egypt. Only the ankh remains, the key of life. Now let's look at the fifth clue briefly. So that's the drill hole in one of the inset areas and the small drainage trenches around the island. So these are simply the mechanisms for maintaining the water level and ensuring that the plant gets what it needs. At this point, a few intriguing questions still remain unanswered. So let's have a look at these questions. Why an island? Well, the energy through the water must be continuous, so it must not be broken. Hence, the circle of water, so the water could spiral with the energy. Next question. Why 5 stories deep? Well, the water was required to circle the island, as I said, and to a good depth to enable the water to receive and store the piezoelectric energy, and of course to keep it cycling within the water. There is also a room concealed inside the island, which can only be reached by diving down through the water. Next question. What are the small rooms or alcoves, and why are the ceilings there indented? So most of the stone for the walls is geopolymer, but there has to be at least one wall or ceiling that is cut from natural stone. Otherwise, it's not possible to monitor those little rooms and provide the necessary frequency vibration in that area. The geopolymers just don't have that ability. If these little rooms are so important, what's kept in them? Well, there are seeds, ankhs, the ones ready for use, also the machines for creating the ankhs, and machines for the maintenance and vibratory needs of the complex. The water level has to be kept at a certain level for the energy. Too much energy being produced meant the water had to be reduced, and too little energy, the water level had to be increased. The steps indicate the range of levels that the water was kept at. What was the blind chamber for? So it's also known as the sarcophagus chamber. Well, that wasn't in the dream, so my guess is that it's where some technology and information or such like was stored quite securely, I'd say too. Why was this place so important to Ramses? So Ramses is Seti's son, and he was known as Ramses the Great. He lived for a very long time, And as a child, he spent a lot of time while the temple was being built, and he also spent time in the Osireion, it is assumed. So one could guess that as a child he would have enjoyed seeing the water in this area and probably have jumped in and swam around, and might have been a contributing factor to why he lived so much longer than most other pharaohs. Why was there a slight indent around each of the massive granite blocks, as well as one of the sunken areas? So there's two sunken areas where something's missing, but there's only an indent around one of them. And there's good reason for this. And it's simply to do with cleaning. So one of those indents, which is missing the item, was where the plant was held, and the plant would overflow from the stone box that it was in. And so the box itself was never cleaned. It didn't need to be cleaned. It had the plant in it, and the plant overflowed around it. But the other items, the massive granite blocks and the obelisk, had to be cleaned on a regular basis. And over hundreds and hundreds of years of this cleaning process taking place, the base of these objects had a kind of roughness about it, as if they'd been encircled. The cleaning process involved vibration, and if you just compare it to, say, water blasting, so you're water blasting from the top down, and when you get to the bottom, you're blasting into the corner, and it used the vibrationary technique, but it also left a very slight indent around each of the blocks and around the base of the obelisk. Why is an obelisk needed for energy when the stones were producing piezoelectric energy? Well, the obelisk was for radiant energy, which was used with the tools and the devices of the ancients, while piezoelectric energy is a form of healing energy, which is completely different. Was this structure fully underground and totally covered? Well, I suspect not, because of the obelisk and the need for the plant to get light. But this is a different structure to the one I have seen in my dreams, so that I cannot be completely sure of. But I can show you what the structure looked like above ground of the one I saw in the dream, and this is it. So what were the flower of life diagrams all about on the wall? Well, they were carved or painted on at a much later date. It must have been some residual memory of what this place was actually for, because the flower of life means longevity, and so someone seemed to know what the place was all about. And what about the seemingly melted stone? Well, this is actually a red herring. It only looks like it's melted. It is actually the unfinished portion of where the dynastic Egyptians, i.e. Seti's workers, had got to while smoothing down the polygonal blocks, and it would be not even seen if they had had the time to finish off the job and smooth down all the outer wall to prepare it for the hieroglyphs and the pictures that they were putting on there. So hopefully that answers all the leftover questions. If you do have more questions, please let me know in the comments. In the meantime, let's pull this all together and do a summary and an overview of this amazing structure. In my opinion, The Osireion was a temple of life. Obviously, we need to call any ancient structure a temple or maybe a tomb. It just sounds nicer than the machine of life. Okay, so I'm being a bit cynical, but yeah, I think it is nicer to call it a temple of life. The tree was a special plant that provided longevity to the ancient ones, but it alone was only capable of extending life by a certain amount, maybe 900 to 1,000 years. But combine it with a small device designed to leverage the plant through frequency and vibration, it created something that could not only prolong life indefinitely, but with the use of the Ankh, it could also reverse the effects of aging. The waters that surrounded the island had special healing and nutritive powers that were useful to both the people and the plant. It could be bathed in without any risk. Deep down in the water, about 3/4 of the way down, is a secret room. Only the keepers knew how to access the room. I saw them dive down, but I did not see inside the room. I think there is some kind of equipment down there, but I cannot describe it. As for the flower of life, well, it's clear that some knowledge of the purpose of this site must have lingered for thousands of years after it was no longer used. The flower of life, from my perspective, is a design that represents the secrets of life. But it is difficult to imagine it being built for any reason other than one that benefited a large number of people. It was essentially their key to life. Imagine how far we'd go today to achieve that. The plant alone will extend life. The waters will heal. But the mechanism to increase the efficacy using the Ankh was required to reverse the effects of aging. How much would we pay for that today? As for the plant, well, I have spent my life searching for this plant. I know how it looks. I know how it smells. And I remember the structure of its roots, the shape of its leaves. I hope one day to find it before it's too late for me.